All right, for this lesson, we are going to talk about Sweat by Zora Neale Hurston. So before we dive into the story, I want to talk a little bit about the author because she is considered one of our most important, most prolific, and most influential writers we have on the 20th century. You might have heard of some of her works. One of her most famous stories is called Their Eyes Were Watching God. That is personally my favorite book ever. And so they even made a movie for it. It was a made-for-TV movie, but it is a really good movie, and it is a really good book. But I'm sure as you were reading this, it was a little bit hard to understand because you got into their dialogue. You got into the African-American dialect, and that is what she is known for. So that's what I want to talk about right now, and that's because that right there has something to do with the impact that she had. So she was around in the Harlem Renaissance, and I'm sure you've heard of people like Langston Hughes, maybe Alice Walker. Those were all important writers who were around the same time with Zora Neale Hurston, and they were even friends. And Alice Walker actually even paid to have a gravestone erected for Zora Neale Hurston after she passed, because when she died a very poor woman and couldn't even afford a gravestone. So it was Alice Walker who went out and did that. So anyways, let's go back to her writing style. Think about, I believe this was around like 1926, and so when books were published, we didn't have things like TV and Instagram and YouTube and Facebook and all of these means of social media and forms of entertainment. We didn't have those things readily available like back then, and so a lot of people relied on books. Scary, I know. But people would read books as a form of entertainment. And so for books to be sold, they had to sound like the white man, because that is what sold. Those were the ethnic group and the gender whom was considered educated. And so in order for your books to be read, reviewed well, for people to want to get their hands on them, they needed to sound like the white man. So a lot of people did that. And Zora Neale Hurston came along and kind of broke the rules on that. And she said, nope, not going to do it. So she wrote in a very feministic way. It's obvious that she's a woman when she's writing, and she wrote in the black dialect. She really wanted you to, one, understand what it was like in this time period. She wrote a lot of what are called historical fictions, and historical fictions are it gives you, it may not be, everything might not be actually true, but it gives you an insight on, the time period, and there are some facts in it. And Their Eyes Are Watching God is a really good historical fiction because there are certain elements of that story that are true, and it gives us an idea of a lot of things about how it was back then, and some pieces are true, so we can really gather information on what it was like back then. This story, is a little bit like that, and we'll talk about that when we start talking about the story. But to really get character depth and character involvement here, then we really need to get to know the characters. And so Zora Neale Hurston wrote in that dialect, one, to say that just because we may talk like this, it doesn't mean we're not intelligent. It's just the way that we talked. And so Zora Neale Hurston was actually very educated. She lied about her age to go to school. She was actually, I believe, 26, and she lied and said that she was 16 so she could go back to school, and then she ended up graduating and going to a Bernard College and getting a degree. So she was very well educated. So she wrote these books and short stories, and she wrote a lot, and people really, really liked them. And so her writing, the way that she did, really paved the way for other people to come along behind her and kind of, I don't want to say mimic, because mimic makes it sound like they're copying her, but she made it to where it was okay to write in a way that represented who you were, to write in the style that you wanted to write in, and really to give accurate information of what it was like in this time period. So now that you know all this information about Zora Neale Hurston, let's talk about this this book story. It's called Sweat. And let's think about the title, and it's called Sweat because she uses that in several of the lines. We have Dahlia, and we have, I think it's Delia, and Sykes is her husband. And so we have Delia is the worker, and she works hard. She cleans clothes of a white family, and he doesn't like that. And her work is hard, and so she makes references that, she sweats. She sweats all day long. She's built that house. It's her money, her blood, sweat, and tears. And so that's the reason for this title. And it really sets a tone from the very beginning, because she, was busting her rear end from sun up to sundown. And so, sweating all day long, blood, sweat, and tears going into her work. And this was her world. This was her life. And so this gives us an indication that she doesn't have a very happy life. It mentions that they got married, were happy for 2 months, and after 2 months, Sykes started beating her. And so they have been together for a very long time, and he is very abusive. And not just abusive, but mean, by the way that he is with that rattlesnake, where he gets a kick out of being mean to her. And so he verbally puts her down, and he's very abusive. He doesn't work. He uses her money to pay for his mistress. And so he's very disrespectful to her. We have some of the symbolism here is, obviously the sweat. And then we have white, it talks about the white clothes and the black clothes. He says, I don't want the white clothes in here. But then he goes and takes all these bright, white, clean clothes, and he walks all over them and gets them all dirty. And so, he kind of scares her with this snake, because it is shown from the very beginning that her greatest fear are snakes. And this was set in Florida, which that is the setting for almost all of her stories. And that's because that's where she was from, and that's where she grew up. And I'm not going to go off on that. This will be a 45-minute lesson. But anyway, so, kind of the swampy areas of Florida where snakes were pretty predominant there. And so he teases her with a snake and pretends to throw a snake on her. It's really a whip. And so he's being really mean with that. One day he brings home a box, says to open it, and in it it's a snake. And so, she says, get that out of here, go kill that snake. And, he doesn't. It's just kind of ha-ha. And so this snake stays there. And this can be symbolic too, because he just stays there and rattle. And it's almost like background music of a movie, where it's kind of leading up to something that's about to happen. This could be an example of foreshadowing, where it's about to strike. Physically, it's about to strike. And so she's scared, runs upstairs, and then he comes home, and ironic turn of events, he is the one that's bitten by the snake. And so he's, asking, pleading her for help, and she doesn't. And the final thoughts were, the doctor won't be able to get here in time. She sits under a tree. And that tree is symbolic too, because that tree produces fruit that's poison, and it's not native to Florida land. But so she sits under that tree, and it doesn't say at the end he dies, but it's very well assumed that he passes away from this story. So when you go into this discussion, I want you to think about, and this is one of the questions, why do you think that she stayed with him for so long? When she's obviously the one making the money, does that have anything to do with the historical information that we can gather from this? I really want you to break down the characters in this discussion, and I want you to talk about why setting is important in this discussion, because it is. Our setting here, it goes along, she's built this home, but I want you to think about the two main questions I want you to think about are, explain the setting of this story. We've already discussed most of the symbolism in this story. I want you to also discuss the use of the dialect and talk about how that helped develop the characters, and what did that make you think about the characters. And then obviously, like what I just said, what do you think her reasons were for staying with him for so long when she was the one who made the money? Why do you think she put up with him using her money to pay for a mistress? So think about all these things. I hope you liked it. And if you really had a hard time understanding it after watching this, go back and read it again, and maybe it will make a little bit more sense. But that is all for now.